The storm rolled across the desert like a living beast. Lightning tore open the black sky above the dusty frontier town of Silver Creek, turning the empty streets white for a split second before plunging them back into darkness. Wind howled through crooked wooden buildings, rattling shutters and sending loose signs swinging wildly. Most folks in Silver Creek had long since gone indoors, except for one man. Caleb Dawson sat astride his tall chestnut horse at the edge of town, hat pulled low against the rain. His long coat snapped in the wind as thunder rumbled. Across the desert, Caleb was the kind of man the frontier carved out of stone and hardship. Tall, broad-shouldered, quiet, a lone cowboy who preferred the company of horses over people. Folks in Silver Creek said he'd seen too much of life to waste words on it. Some said he'd fought in wars down south. Others whispered he once hunted outlaws across 3 territories, but Caleb Dawson never confirmed any of it. He just rode his land, worked his ranch, and stayed clear of trouble, which was exactly why he was riding back toward the outskirts. Tonight, storms like this one were dangerous. Lightning could spook cattle, flash floods could swallow a horse whole. He planned to check the far pasture before heading back to his ranch, but then something strange caught his eye. Through the sheets of rain, near the edge of town, stood a lonely wagon. The lantern hanging from its side flickered wildly in the wind. Caleb frowned. Nobody in their right mind would travel tonight. He nudged his horse forward. The wagon looked old, weather-beaten, and nearly empty, but it wasn't abandoned. Someone sat inside. A woman. Caleb slowed his horse, studying her carefully. She sat curled beneath a thin shawl, soaked from the storm. Her head was bowed low, long dark hair clinging to her face. She looked like she hadn't moved in hours. Lightning flashed again, and Caleb saw something that made his jaw tighten. Small wooden trunk beside her, stamped with bold letters. Mail Order Bride Agency, St. Louis. Caleb exhaled slowly. He'd heard of these arrangements before. Lonely ranchers out west, sending for wives they'd never met. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it ended in heartbreak. But one thing was certain. A mail-order bride didn't arrive alone. In a storm, without someone waiting. He rode closer. His horse snorted softly as it approached the wagon. The woman slowly lifted her head. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither spoke. Her eyes were a deep gray, like storm clouds themselves, and they carried a kind of sadness Caleb had seen before. The kind that comes from running out of places to go. Caleb tipped his hat slightly. "Evelyn." "Ma'am," her voice trembled slightly. "Evelyn, you expecting someone?" She hesitated, then shook her head slowly. "No." Caleb glanced toward the empty road leading out of town. "Your husband didn't show?" The woman's fingers tightened around the shawl. "No." That one word carried more pain than a whole story. Caleb studied her again. She looked exhausted, cold, and far too thin for someone who just traveled halfway across the country. "How long you been sitting here?" "Since morning." Caleb frowned. "That's near 10 hours. "I know." The wind gusted harder. Rain poured down harder now, soaking both of them. Caleb looked toward the distant lights of the saloon across town, then back at her. "You got somewhere to stay tonight?" She looked down again. "No." A bolt of lightning cracked across the sky. Her shoulders flinched. That's when Caleb noticed something else. Bruises. Faint, but visible. Along her wrist, where the shawl slipped. His jaw tightened. Someone had hurt her. Badly. He leaned slightly forward in the saddle. "What's your name, ma'am?" She hesitated, then answered quietly. "Eliza Hart." Caleb nodded once. "Caleb Dawson." She looked up again, studying him carefully. Maybe deciding if he was dangerous. Maybe deciding if she had any other choice. The storm roared around them. Caleb finally said the words that would change both their lives. "Well, Miss Hart, you can't stay out here tonight." She gave a faint, bitter smile. "I don't have anywhere else." The wind whipped her hair across her face again. For a moment Caleb said nothing. Then he dismounted. His boots hit the mud beside the wagon. He walked closer slowly, so he wouldn't scare her. Close. She looked even more fragile, but there was something else in her eyes, too. Strength. The kind of strength that only grows from surviving things most people don't. Caleb spoke gently. My ranch is about 10 miles west. Her eyes widened slightly. You're offering me shelter? Just a roof for the night. He paused. You can decide what you want to do. Come morning. Eliza studied him. The storm thundered again. For a long moment she said nothing, then she whispered something so quietly, Caleb almost didn't hear it. Why would you help me? Caleb shrugged slightly. Because leaving someone out here in a storm ain't the kind of man I am. A long silence. Then slowly, very slowly, she climbed down from the wagon. Her legs nearly gave out. When her boots touched the mud, Caleb caught her before she fell. She stiffened instantly in his arms, like someone used to defending herself. Caleb, let go. Right away. Her breath trembled. Sorry. You ain't gotta apologize. He grabbed her small trunk and tied it behind his saddle. Then he turned to her. You ever ride? Not much. Well, tonight's your night to learn. He helped her onto the horse. She sat stiffly behind the saddle horn. Then, he climbed up behind her. The horse shifted slightly beneath their combined weight. Caleb took the reins. You hold tight. Eliza hesitated, then gently gripped the front of the saddle. The horse began moving slowly through the storm. Silver Creek faded behind them. For a while, neither spoke. The only sounds were thunder, wind, and the steady rhythm of hooves in mud. Then Eliza finally asked quietly, Mr. Dawson? Yeah. What happens if the man who ordered me comes looking? Caleb's eyes darkened slightly beneath the brim of his hat. If he left you sittin' in a storm for 10 hours. His voice turned cold. He ain't a man worth answering to. Eliza didn't respond, but Caleb felt her grip the saddle a little tighter. They rode for nearly an hour through the rain, until finally, the storm began to ease, and Caleb's ranch appeared in the distance. A wide wooden house, a tall barn, fences stretching across the moonlit plains. Eliza stared at it in disbelief. You live here alone? Mostly. He guided the horse toward the barn, but as they rode closer, Caleb suddenly noticed something that made his blood run cold. The barn door was open, wide open. He pulled the horse to a sudden stop. Eliza turned slightly. What is it? Caleb's eyes scanned the dark ranch yard. His voice dropped to a whisper. I closed that door before I left. The wind creaked the barn slowly, back and forth. Something inside shifted. A shadow moved. Caleb's hand slowly dropped to the revolver at his hip. And then a gunshot exploded from the barn. The bullet slammed into the fence beside them. Eliza gasped. A voice shouted from the darkness. Well now, look what the storm dragged in. Caleb recognized that voice instantly, and it meant only one thing. Outlaws, waiting for him. And now, they had Eliza too. The echo of the gunshot still rang across the ranch yard. Caleb Dawson's hand froze on the grip of his revolver. His sharp eyes locked on the dark opening of the barn. The wind had quieted, but tension now filled the air, thicker than the storm clouds that still hung overhead. Behind him, Eliza's heart held her breath. She could feel the sudden change in Caleb's body. The calm cowboy she'd ridden with moments before had vanished. In his place was something else, something dangerous. His voice dropped low. Don't move. Eliza nodded. Silently, another shadow shifted inside the barn. Then boots crunched slowly against the dirt floor. One man stepped into the weak lantern glow, hanging outside the stable door. Tall, lean, black hat, a crooked grin spreading across a scarred face. Caleb's eyes hardened instantly. Evident. Wade. The man tipped his hat mockingly. Well now, Caleb Dawson himself was wondering when you'd get home. Two more men appeared behind him, rifles resting lazily in their hands. Eliza's stomach tightened. Outlaws. The worst kind. Wade Cole had once ridden cattle drives with Caleb years ago, but somewhere along the line, Wade had traded honest work for robbery, gambling, and bloodshed. Now, he was one of the most feared men roaming the frontier. Wade's eyes slowly drifted to Eliza sitting on the horse. "Well now, what do we got here?" Caleb's voice sharpened instantly. "None of your concern," Wade chuckled. "Looks like the quiet rancher's been busy." Eliza felt heat rise to her face, though fear still wrapped around her chest. Caleb dismounted slowly, his revolver now fully in his hand. "State your business." Wade leaned casually against the barn door. "Just passing through." Caleb didn't blink. "You break into my barn when you're passing through?" Wade shrugged. "Storm looked nasty. Thought we'd borrow some shelter." Caleb's jaw tightened. "You should have kept riding." One of the other outlaws laughed. Don't be like that, Dawson. Ain't neighborly." But Caleb didn't move. The air between the men felt like dry gunpowder, waiting for a spark. Then Wade's attention shifted back to Eliza. His grin widened. "You gonna introduce us?" Caleb stepped slightly in front of the horse. "No." Wade's eyes narrowed. "Aw, now. That hurts my feelings." Eliza watched the exchange carefully. Something about Wade Cole made her skin crawl. Predator. That was the word. Men like him always looked at people like possessions. Caleb spoke again. "You done here?" Wade sighed dramatically. "Well, truth is, we were hoping to talk business." Caleb didn't lower the gun. "I ain't interested." Wade pushed off the barn door slowly. "Oh, I think you will be." His smile disappeared. "See, we're planning a little job." Caleb's voice turned colder. "Then you picked the wrong ranch." Wade tilted his head. "Not exactly." He pointed toward the distant hills. "Silver Creek Bank gets a shipment tomorrow." Caleb said nothing. "We could use someone who knows the land like you." The silence stretched. Finally, Caleb answered, "I don't rob banks." Wade's eyes darkened. "You used to run with men who did worse." "That was a long time ago." Wade stepped closer. Now, rain dripped from his hat brim. "You always were the best rider, the fastest draw." His voice lowered. "Shame to waste that talent playing farmer." Caleb's grip tightened on the revolver. "Leave." One of the outlaws shifted his rifle. "Maybe we don't feel like it." The tension exploded instantly. Caleb's revolver snapped. Up. 3 rifles raised in response. Eliza felt her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. This was how people died on the frontier. Fast, sudden, and often over nothing. Then Wade suddenly laughed. The tension cracked slightly. "Easy, boys." The rifles lowered. Wade studied Caleb for a long moment. Then he smiled again. "All right, Dawson. We'll ride out." Caleb didn't relax. Now, Wade turned slowly toward his horse tied near the fence. But before climbing up, he looked once more at Eliza. His eyes lingered. "Too long." "Well now, miss." Eliza stayed silent. Wade smirked. "Storm's got a funny way of bringing people together." Then he swung into the saddle. The other outlaws mounted quickly. Before leaving, Wade called out one final time. "Think about that offer, Dawson." His smile turned dark. "Wouldn't want anything unfortunate happening to your new guest." Then the 3 riders disappeared into the fading storm. The ranch yard fell silent. Again, Eliza finally exhaled. Caleb watched the darkness for a long moment before holstering his revolver. "They gone." Eliza slowly slid off the horse, her legs still shaking slightly. "Who were they?" Caleb grabbed the horse's reins. "Trouble." She swallowed. "They seemed to know you." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he led the horse into the barn and began removing the saddle. Finally, he said quietly, "I used to ride with men like them." Eliza stared. "You were an outlaw?" "Once." Her eyes widened slightly. He glanced at her. "That bother you?" Eliza hesitated, then shook her head softly. "No." That answer surprised him. "Why not?" She looked down. "Because people don't run from storms like I did, unless they've also made mistakes." Caleb studied her face carefully. There it was, again. That quiet strength. He gestured toward the house. "You should get warm." Inside, the ranch house was simple but sturdy. A fireplace crackled to life quickly under Caleb's hands. Eliza sat near it, holding a tin cup of coffee he handed her. Warmth slowly returned to her fingers. She looked around. You really live here alone? Mostly. No family? No. Another silence passed. Then Caleb asked gently, the man who ordered you? Eliza stiffened slightly. Yes. What happened? She stared into the fire for a long time. Finally, she spoke. My husband died. Caleb frowned. But you said. He died before I arrived. Her voice trembled slightly now. His brother met me at the train station instead. Caleb felt something cold twist in his stomach. And? Eliza lifted her sleeve slightly. The bruises on her wrist were worse than Caleb realized. He said I still belong to the family. Caleb's jaw clenched. And when I refused, her voice cracked. I ran. The fire popped loudly in the silence. Caleb stood slowly. Eliza. She looked up. You're safe here. Those four words hit her harder than she expected. Safe. It had been a long time since anyone said that to her. She blinked quickly to hide sudden tears. Thank you, Caleb. Nodded once. You can take the bedroom. And you? I'll sleep by the fire. But before either could say more, a distant sound echoed across the plains. Hoofbeats, fast. Too many to count. Caleb turned toward the window. His expression hardened instantly. Eliza felt fear creeping back into her chest. What is it? Caleb reached slowly for his rifle. Leaning against the wall, his voice came out low and deadly. Wade Cole doesn't ride with that many men. The thunder of hooves was getting closer. Much closer. Eliza whispered, then who is it? Caleb looked back at her, and the answer in his eyes made her blood run cold. The man you ran from. Sighed. At least 10 riders were approaching the ranch. The thunder of hooves rolled across the plains like an approaching war. Caleb Dawson stood by the window of his ranch house, rifle in hand, his sharp eyes cutting through the darkness outside. 10 riders, maybe more. Their silhouettes appeared against the faint moonlight, breaking through the storm clouds. Eliza's heart felt the warmth of the fire vanish from her bones. Her hands trembled slightly around the tin coffee cup. They found me. Caleb didn't turn from the window. You sure they're yours? She nodded slowly, recognized the lead rider. Caleb's jaw tightened. Who is he? Eliza's voice barely rose above a whisper. Thomas Whitaker. The name meant nothing to Caleb, but the fear in her voice meant everything. Your husband's brother? Yes. Caleb kept watching the riders approach. They ride armed? Yes. Then they didn't come to talk. The hoofbeats grew louder, closer. Dust kicked up in the moonlight. Lanterns glowed in the darkness like floating fireflies. Caleb turned away from the window. Eliza. She looked up. You trust me? Her answer came instantly. Yes. Then listen carefully. He moved quickly now, grabbing cartridges from a wooden box near the wall and loading them into his rifle. If things go bad, you take the back door and run for the trees behind the creek. Her eyes widened. You're not coming? I'll hold them long enough. Her heart dropped. That's suicide. Caleb shrugged slightly. No. She stood suddenly. I won't let you die for me. His voice softened. I've handled worse odds. But Eliza shook her head fiercely. You don't understand. Then tell me. She hesitated. The riders outside were nearly at the gate now. Time was running out. Caleb's voice grew firm. Eliza. She swallowed hard. I can't let them take me. I figured that much. No, you don't understand. Her gray eyes lifted to meet his. If they catch me. Her voice cracked. They'll kill me. Caleb froze. Why? Before she could answer, a gunshot blasted into the air outside. A voice roared across the ranch yard. Caleb Dawson. Caleb stepped onto the front porch. Rifle ready. 10 horses stood in the dirt yard. 10 armed men. Their lanterns cast long shadows across the ranch, and at the front sat a tall, well-dressed man with silver hair and cruel eyes. Thomas Whitaker. He looked nothing like the dusty ranch hands beside him. His coat was expensive. his boots polished. But his smile carried no warmth, only possession. "Well now," Whitaker called. "Seems the runaway bride found herself a cowboy." Caleb's rifle stayed steady. "You're trespassing," Whitaker chuckled. "That woman belongs to my family." Caleb's voice dropped dangerously low. "She ain't property." Whitaker's smile vanished. "She was purchased legally through a marriage contract." Eliza stepped into the doorway behind Caleb. "I was married to your brother, not you." Whitaker's eyes snapped toward her. "There you are." His gaze darkened with anger. "You've caused me quite a lot of trouble, Eliza." Caleb shifted slightly, blocking her from view. "She ain't going anywhere with you." Whitaker tilted his head. "And who exactly are you to decide that?" "Someone with a rifle." The men around Whitaker chuckled. One spat in the dirt. Whitaker studied Caleb carefully. "Dawson, isn't it?" Caleb said nothing. "I know your name." That got Caleb's attention. Whitaker continued. "Former tracker, former gunman, former outlaw." Eliza's eyes widened slightly. Caleb didn't react. Whitaker smiled slowly. "I also know you like to keep your past buried." Caleb's voice remained steady. "Get to the point." Whitaker nodded toward Eliza. "She stole something from my family." Eliza's breath caught. "I didn't steal it." Whitaker's voice snapped like a whip. Silence. Caleb frowned slightly. "What did she take?" Whitaker's smile returned. "Something valiant." Eliza stepped forward suddenly. "He's lying." Whitaker ignored her. "Inside that little trunk she carries is something worth a great deal of money." Caleb glanced toward the small trunk near the fireplace. "Eliza?" Her face had gone pale. "Don't listen to him." Whitaker leaned back in his saddle. "My dear brother was not simply a rancher." Caleb's eyes narrowed. "What was he?" Whitaker's smile widened. "A banker." That explained the well-dressed riders, and before his unfortunate death, Whitaker continued, he entrusted certain financial documents to his bride. Caleb's eyes flicked toward Eliza. Again, her silence confirmed it. Whitaker spread his arms. "Now, those papers belong to me," Eliza shouted from the porch. "They prove you murdered him." The ranch yard fell silent. Whitaker's smile froze. Caleb slowly looked back at him. "Did you?" Whitaker laughed coldly. "Careful, Dawson." But Caleb's eyes had gone ice cold now. "Did you kill your brother?" Whitaker's men shifted uneasily. Finally, Whitaker sighed. "Well, when a man stands between you and a fortune," his voice hardened, "sometimes he has to disappear." Eliza felt tears burn in her eyes. "He poisoned him." Whitaker smirked, and she saw the ledger. Caleb's mind clicked quickly now. "So the papers prove it." Whitaker shrugged. "Perhaps." Caleb raised the rifle slightly higher. "Then you ain't getting them." Whitaker sighed dramatically. "That's unfortunate." He raised one gloved hand. Instantly, his men raised their rifles. "You have 10 seconds to hand over the girl and the trunk." Caleb didn't move. "Eliza," he murmured quietly. "Back inside." She shook her head. "I'm not leaving you." "Do it." "But." Eliza stayed beside him. Whitaker began counting. 10. Caleb's finger tightened on the trigger. 9. The wind rustled across the empty plains. 8. Eliza suddenly stepped forward. "I'll give you the papers." Caleb's head snapped toward her. "Eliza," she whispered quickly, "I have a plan." Whitaker smiled. 7. Eliza grabbed the trunk from inside the doorway. Her hands trembled as she carried it toward the porch steps. Whitaker's eyes gleamed. 6. She set the trunk in the dirt. 5. Then she looked at Caleb and whispered something that shocked him. "There's no papers inside." Whitaker reached the bottom of his count. 4. 3. His men prepared to fire. Caleb whispered back, "Then what's in it?" Eliza's eyes locked with his, and she answered softly, "Dynamite." Caleb's eyes widened. Whitaker shouted, "2." Eliza struck a match. The tiny flame of the match flickered in Eliza's heart's trembling hand. For a moment, the entire ranch yard seemed to freeze. 10 armed riders, one stubborn cowboy, one desperate woman, and a wooden trunk filled with dynamite sitting in the dirt between them. Caleb Dawson stared at the match, then at Eliza, his pulse hammered in his chest. Easy, he whispered under his breath. Eliza's eyes stayed locked on Thomas Whitaker. The flame burned closer to her fingers. Whitaker's confident smile began to fade. "What are you doing?" he demanded. Eliza's voice came out steady, despite the fear twisting in her stomach. "Ending this." The wind shifted across the ranch yard, carrying the smell of rain and gunpowder. Whitaker leaned forward in his saddle. "You're bluffing." Eliza tilted her head slightly. "Am I?" Caleb slowly stepped off the porch, his rifle still pointed at Whitaker's chest. He moved until he stood beside Eliza, close enough that he could see her hand shaking, close enough to hear her whisper, "Please, tell me you're good at running." Caleb almost smiled. "Best thing I do." Whitaker finally noticed something he hadn't before, the fuse sticking out of the trunk. His eyes widened. "You stupid girl." The match dropped. The fuse caught. Instantly, a bright spark began racing toward the dynamite. Whitaker shouted, "Shoot her." Gunfire exploded across the ranch yard, but Caleb was faster. His rifle cracked once. One of Whitaker's men flew backward off his horse. Caleb grabbed Eliza's arm. "Run." They sprinted toward the barn as bullets tore through the night air. The fuse hissed violently behind them. Whitaker screamed, "Get away from that trunk." But it was too late. The fuse disappeared into the wood. For one terrifying second, nothing happened. Then boom. The explosion shattered the silence of the plains. Fire erupted into the sky. The blast wave knocked horses sideways and threw men into the dirt. Whitaker's riders scattered in chaos. Dust and smoke swallowed the ranch yard. Inside the barn, Caleb slammed the door shut and pulled Eliza behind a thick support beam. The ground shook beneath them. Hay fell from the rafters. Eliza's ears rang from the blast. Did it work?" Caleb peeked through a crack in the barn wall. "Worked too well." Sighed. Half the yard was burning. 2 horses had bolted into the dark plains. Several of Whitaker's men struggled to get up from the dirt, but Whitaker himself was still alive. And, furious, Caleb grabbed his revolver. "Stay here." Eliza grabbed his arm. "No." Her eyes were wide with fear. "You go out there alone, and they'll kill you." Caleb studied her for a moment. "You got a better plan?" She thought fast. Then she noticed something inside the barn. 6 horses. Strong ranch horses, ready to ride. Her eyes lit up. "Yes." Caleb followed her gaze. A slow grin formed on his face. "You're thinking what I'm thinking." Eliza nodded. "Stampede." Caleb laughed softly. "Remind me never to get on your bad side." Outside, Whitaker's voice roared through the smoke. "Find them." Boots crunched toward the barn. Eliza grabbed a saddle knife hanging nearby and quickly cut the horses loose from their posts. The animals shifted nervously, smelling the smoke and hearing the shouting outside. Caleb kicked the barn doors open. Whitaker's men turned just in time to see 6 terrified horses charging straight at them. Caleb fired 2 quick shots into the air behind the animals. The gunfire spooked them completely. The horses exploded into a full stampede. Whitaker's men scattered in panic as 1,200 pounds of muscle thundered across the yard. One rider was knocked completely off his feet, another dove behind a wagon. Whitaker cursed violently. Caleb grabbed Eliza's hand. "Now." They sprinted toward the remaining horse tied near the fence. Caleb swung into the saddle first, then pulled Eliza up behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist as the horse lunged forward. Behind them, Whitaker finally regained control of the situation. His voice roared through the chaos. After them, gunshots cracked through the night. A bullet tore through Caleb's coat sleeve. Another struck the fence beside them. But Caleb's horse was already flying across the open plains. Wind rushed past them. Eliza clung to him tightly. "Where are we going?" "Canyon." "What canyon?" "The only one they won't follow." Behind them, 4 riders had already broken free of the stampede and were chasing hard. Whitaker led them himself. Eliza looked back and saw the hatred burning in his eyes. He won't stop. Nope. The horse galloped harder across the desert. Moonlight illuminated the rocky landscape ahead. Tall cliffs began rising from the earth like giant stone walls. The entrance to a narrow canyon appeared. Caleb steered straight for it. Eliza's heart pounded. They'll trap us in there. Caleb's voice stayed calm. Only if they're smarter than me. The horse thundered into the canyon. Hooves echoed against the stone walls behind them. Whitaker and his riders followed without hesitation. Dust clouds filled the narrow passage. Eliza held tighter to Caleb as the canyon twisted deeper into darkness. Then suddenly, Caleb pulled the horse to a stop. What are you doing? He turned in the saddle and looked back toward the approaching riders. A calm smile touched his face. Spring, spring. Then Eliza heard it. The distant roar of water. Caleb guided the horse forward a few more yards, and the canyon suddenly ended. A steep drop, 20 feet down into a rushing river. Eliza gasped. There's nowhere to go. Behind them, Whitaker's riders burst around the canyon bend. Caleb looked at Eliza. You trust me? Her heart raced, but she nodded. Yes. Caleb took a deep breath. Then he whispered, hold on, and kicked the horse forward. The animal leaped straight off the cliff. Eliza screamed as they plunged toward the raging river below. Behind them, Whitaker's riders skidded to a halt at the canyon edge, just in time to see Caleb Dawson and Eliza Hart vanish into the dark water. Whitaker stared down into the rushing current. His eyes burned with fury. They can't have survived that. But deep below, the river carried 2 riders and 1 exhausted horse into the darkness of the canyon alive. Barely. Eliza clung to Caleb as the freezing water dragged them downstream. She gasped for breath. We're going to drown. Caleb fought the current with one arm while holding the horse's reins. No. His voice strained. We're going to disappear. Far above them, Whitaker's men searched the riverbank, but the rushing water had already carried Caleb and Eliza far beyond their sight, and for the first time since she arrived in the West, Eliza realized something. She was no longer running alone. The river carried them for nearly half a mile before the current finally slowed. Caleb Dawson's horse struggled toward the rocky bank, hooves slipping against wet stones before finally climbing out of the freezing water. Caleb slid from the saddle first, then he turned and helped Eliza down. The moment her boots touched the ground, her legs buckled. Caleb caught her quickly. Easy. She clung to his coat, shivering violently. I can't feel my hands. You're freezing. He quickly led the horse into a small cluster of trees beside the river, hidden from the canyon above. The moon finally broke through the clouds. Silver light spread across the desert. Caleb moved fast, gathering dry brush and striking a match. Within minutes, a small fire crackled between the rocks. Eliza sat beside it, wrapping her arms around herself as warmth slowly returned. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The events of the night still echoed in their minds. Explosions, gunfire, the leap into the river. Finally, Eliza looked at Caleb. You saved my life. Caleb shrugged slightly. You helped blow up my ranch. Despite everything, she laughed softly. I suppose that makes us even. Caleb stared into the fire. Arn survived. That's good, but Whitaker won't stop. Eliza's smile faded. No, the flames flickered across her gray eyes. He never does. Caleb studied her carefully. You said those papers prove he killed his brother. Yes. Then why didn't you tell me earlier? She hesitated, then reached slowly into the inside lining of her wet coat. From a hidden pocket, she pulled out a small leather book. The ledger. Caleb's eyes narrowed. So the trunk. Just dynamite. He chuckled softly. Remind me again never to play poker with you. But Eliza didn't smile. There's more. She opened the ledger carefully. Inside were pages filled with numbers, names, dates. Caleb leaned closer to the firelight. What am I looking at? Her voice turned serious. Proof. Whitaker has been stealing money from the bank for years. Caleb frowned. That's not enough to send 10 Armed men across the frontier. She turned to the final page, and this? Caleb's eyes widened. The numbers were enormous. A fortune. He planned to move the money tomorrow. Silver Creek Bank. Caleb muttered. Yes. He'll rob his own bank. Then blame outlaws. Caleb leaned back slowly. That's why Wade Cole showed up earlier. Eliza blinked. What? Whitaker hired him. The realization hit both of them at the same time. Whitaker had planned everything. The robbery, the witnesses, even Eliza's disappearance. Caleb rubbed his jaw. If Whitaker gets that money tomorrow, he disappears forever, and nobody ever proves what he did. Silence settled over the small fire. Then Caleb stood. What are you doing? Eliza asked. He walked to the horse and grabbed the saddle. We're going back. Her eyes widened. To Silver Creek? Yep. Eliza. Whitaker has men everywhere. Then we move faster than he expects. She shook her head. This is suicide. Caleb looked down at her. You got proof that could stop a killer? Yes. You planning to hide with it forever? Her silence answered the question. Caleb's voice softened slightly. You came west for a new life, didn't you? Eliza nodded slowly. Then let's earn it. She stared into the fire. Fear twisted inside her chest. But something else stirred, too. Hope. Finally she stood. All right, Caleb. Smiled slightly. That's the spirit. But neither of them noticed something in the darkness beyond the trees. A shadow moved quietly between the rocks. A rider, watching the man slowly turned his horse and disappeared into the night, back toward Silver Creek, back toward Thomas Whitaker. Morning. Silver Creek. The town looked peaceful beneath the rising sun. Too peaceful. Caleb and Eliza rode slowly toward the main street. But something immediately felt wrong. The saloon doors were shut. The streets were nearly empty. And outside the bank, armed men stood guard. Whitaker's men. Eliza whispered. He's already here. Caleb nodded. Earlier than I expected. Then a familiar voice called from behind them. Well now, look who decided to swim back. Caleb turned slowly. Wade Cole sat on a horse in the middle of the street. 6 outlaws surrounded him. Rifles ready. Caleb sighed. I was hoping you'd be smarter than Whitaker. Wade grinned. Smart enough to get paid. He nodded toward Eliza. And that girl's worth a fortune. Today. Caleb's hand moved slowly toward his revolver. You sure you want to die for another man's money? Wade shrugged. Depends how much he's paying. Suddenly, the bank doors opened. Thomas Whitaker stepped out. Well dressed, calm, confident. He clapped slowly. Impressive. Eliza felt anger surge through her chest. You won't get away with this. Whitaker smiled. Oh, but I already have. Behind him, 2 men dragged a large iron chest toward a waiting wagon. The stolen bank money. Whitaker looked at Caleb. You should have stayed out of this. Dawson, Caleb answered calmly. You should have stayed honest. Whitaker's smile faded. Kill him. Everything exploded at once. Gunfire tore through the street. Caleb's revolver flashed like lightning. 1 outlaw fell. Instantly, Wade fired back. Bullets shattered the saloon windows. Townspeople screamed and ran for cover. Eliza ducked behind a water trough as gunfire raged. Caleb moved like a man born for battle. 2 shots. 2 more outlaws down. But Whitaker's men still outnumbered them. Then, suddenly a rifle cracked from a rooftop. Another outlaw dropped. Wade looked up. What? The second shot rang out. Another man fell. Caleb recognized the shooter instantly. Sheriff Dalton. The old lawman stepped out from the rooftop with his rifle, smoking. Town's had enough of you, Whitaker. Whitaker's face twisted with fury. More townsmen emerged from buildings, armed, angry. Whitaker realized too late Silver Creek had chosen a side, his or Caleb's, and it wasn't his. But Whitaker wasn't finished yet. He grabbed Eliza suddenly and pulled her in front of him. His revolver pressed against her head. The entire street froze. Whitaker's voice roared, "Drop your guns." Caleb's heart stopped. Eliza stood frozen in Whitaker's grip. Whitaker's smile returned. "You should have stayed in the river." Caleb slowly lowered his revolver, but his eyes never left Whitaker. The outlaw leader leaned close to Eliza's ear. "Time to finish what I started." His finger tightened on the trigger. The dusty street of Silver Creek had fallen completely silent. No wind, no voices. Just the sharp, metallic click of a revolver hammer pulling back. Thomas. Whitaker's gun pressed hard against Eliza Hart's temple. Her breathing was shallow, but her gray eyes remained steady across the street. Caleb Dawson stood motionless, his revolver hung low in his hand. Whitaker smirked. "Well now, Dawson, seems the brave cowboy has run out of tricks." Caleb's eyes stayed locked on him. "Let her go," Whitaker laughed, "and give up my only protection?" Behind Caleb, the townspeople watched in tense silence. Sheriff Dalton slowly lowered his rifle. Even he knew one wrong move could get Eliza killed. Whitaker leaned closer to her ear. "You see, Miss Hart, this is why I warned you not to run." Eliza swallowed. But she didn't cry. She didn't beg. Instead, she said something that surprised everyone. "You're already finished." Whitaker's smile faltered slightly. "Oh." She tilted her head toward the bank. "The entire town knows. Now." Whitaker's jaw tightened. "Doesn't matter." His eyes flicked toward the wagon carrying the stolen money. "In 5 minutes, I'll be riding south with enough gold to disappear forever." Caleb finally spoke again. "You won't make it out of town." Whitaker chuckled. "And how exactly will you stop me?" Caleb slowly holstered his revolver. The movement shocked everyone. Whitaker blinked. "Well now, that's unexpected." Caleb raised both hands calmly. "You want to ride out of here?" Whitaker nodded. "Very much." "Then let her go." Whitaker studied him carefully. "You'd surrender that easily?" Caleb shrugged. "I've lived long enough." Eliza's heart pounded. "Caleb," he didn't look at her. Whitaker laughed. "I always knew you were smarter than the others." He shoved Eliza forward suddenly. She stumbled across the dirt street, straight toward Caleb. The moment she reached him, Caleb gently pulled her behind him. Whitaker swung into his saddle. Pleasure doing business. His men grabbed the wagon reins. The horses began moving. Whitaker tipped his hat mockingly. "Goodbye, Dawson." Caleb said nothing. He simply watched the wagon roll past him. Watched Whitaker ride by. Waited. Then Whitaker's horse reached the edge of town, and suddenly bang! A single gunshot cracked through the air. Whitaker froze in the saddle. His revolver slipped from his hand. Then slowly, he collapsed from the horse into the dirt. The town gasped. Eliza turned in shock. "Caleb?" But Caleb hadn't moved. The shot hadn't come from him. Everyone turned toward the saloon rooftop. Sheriff Dalton stood there calmly, smoke rising from his rifle. He spit into the dust. "Bank robbers don't get farewell rides in my town." Whitaker lay motionless in the dirt, dead before he hit the ground. His remaining men dropped their weapons instantly. The fight was over. Silver Creek had won. The townspeople erupted into relieved cheers. Men grabbed the wagon, carrying the stolen gold. Others tied up Whitaker's remaining gang, but Caleb barely noticed any of it. He turned slowly toward Eliza. She stood there trembling, her hair blowing gently in the morning breeze. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she rushed forward and threw her arms around him. Caleb froze in surprise. Then slowly, carefully, he wrapped his arms around her too. "You're all right," he murmured. Her voice cracked softly. "Thought you were going to let him escape." Caleb smiled slightly. "I knew Dalton wouldn't." She pulled back just enough to look at him. "You trusted him?" "Sheriff hates criminals more than he hates me." Eliza laughed through her tears. "Good." They stood there for a moment longer till Sheriff Dalton climbed down from the rooftop and approached them. "Well now," he said gruffly, "looks like you two stirred up quite a mess." Caleb shrugged. "Wasn't intentional." Dalton nodded toward Eliza. "You the one with the evidence?" She lifted the small ledger. Yes. Dalton tipped his hat respectfully. Then you just saved this town a lot more than gold. Eliza blinked. What do you mean? Dalton smiled slightly. Whitaker's been squeezing this town dry for years. He gestured toward the bank. With him gone, folks can breathe again. The sheriff looked back at Caleb. And you, Dawson. Caleb raised an eyebrow. Yeah, you finally did something decent. Caleb chuckled softly. Don't spread it around. Dalton turned to leave, but paused. You two got somewhere to go? Eliza looked at Caleb. He looked back at her. Then he said something. Simple. Yeah. The sheriff nodded. Good. And walked away. Later that evening, sunset painted the desert. Sky in deep shades of gold and crimson. Caleb and Eliza rode slowly across the open plains. Behind them, Silver Creek faded into the distance. Ahead, Caleb's ranch, or what remained of it, smoke, still curled faintly from the ground where the dynamite had exploded. Eliza sighed. I really did destroy your yard. Caleb smiled. Slightly. Barn survived. She looked up at the ranch house. You're sure you want me staying here? Caleb dismounted and helped her down from the horse. Got nowhere better to be? She shook her head slowly. Not anymore. The wind moved gently across the prairie grass. Eliza hesitated. Caleb? Yeah. What happens now? He leaned casually against the fence. Well, his voice softened. I figure you stay as long as you want. Her gray eyes searched his face. And if I never leave? Caleb looked out across the wide open land. Then back at her. His expression was quiet but certain. Then you won't have to. Eliza felt warmth spread through her chest. For the first time since arriving in the West, she felt like she belonged somewhere. Caleb tipped his hat slightly. Storm's over, Miss Hart. She smiled. Yes. Then she stepped closer. And this time, when she hugged him, Caleb didn't hesitate at all.